Proportionality, it's all over tonight's show, and it's difficult to measure the appropriate response to something horrific, isn't it? From keeping the Boston Marathon safe to striking potential terrorists with drones, when does our need for justice and safety outweigh our rational requirements for freedom? The former has gotten way out of proportion, even when the response in question feels right. That's because we take a bad situation, toss in group hostility, and soon enough, we're overwhelmed by vengeance and emotion. And that creates its own messy and irreversible problems. Not to play Monday morning quarterback, but someone has to keep the proportion in check. Are you ready to check in? This is The Independents. Well, hello and happiest Monday. Welcome to the show. I'm Kennedy, and I'm joined by Reason Magazine editor-in-chief Matt Welch. He's got his Monday suit on. And Camille Foster from Freethink Media. He's an entrepreneur, a businessman, and he's got a bod for sensibility and sense. Or the reverse, because he loves Jane Austen. Together we are The Independents. It's Monday, and it's like a steak on a hibachi. It's going to be sizzling. Well, today was Patriots' Day in Boston, and that meant 36,000 chafed, brave masochists took to the streets to run for hours, celebrating the city's catchy new declaration, Boston Strong. Yes, the Boston Marathon, and it has been a year since those filthy Chechens killed 4 people, mangled and injured hundreds of others, yet the race didn't lose its luster. In fact, 9,000 more people ran this year than last. They bring more money to Boston. But let's face it, marathon runners demographically tend to have more disposable time and money, and that's a very good thing for the city. But how much did it cost to keep Boston safe? Well, let's bring in a Bostonian who has kept his eye on the response and expenditures in his beloved city. Garrett Quinn is a Boston reporter for MassLive.com. Welcome, Garrett.
Thanks for having me, Kennedy.
Oh my gosh, you sound so normal. I thought you were going to sound very Bostonian. Well, Garrett, let's talk about this because the people in Boston last year seemed very happy with the police response after last year's horrific attack. When do you think it becomes too much?
Well, you talk to a lot. I talked to a lot of people around Copley Square, which is where the marathon ends in Boston, and many of them were totally fine with what happened today, with regards to the bag searches, the security level, the restricted access that took place in a lot of areas along the route. There was not any, from what I could tell, unhappiness, resistance to it. As far as I know, from what I've heard from police sources, there's been one arrest. I'm not entirely sure what the arrest was for, but that just occurred in Boston. I can't speak for other cities along the route, but there was not a visible agitation or irritation over the security measures that were in place. I went looking for it, and I didn't find it.
Okay, now, last year in November, I ran the New York City Marathon, and a lot of protocol has changed with big marathons like this. You have to check in your bags. You're corralled to certain areas. If you have a checked bag, you have a bracelet that lets you exit one way. So it's very, very strict, and it's almost impossible to hook up with loved ones after the race. We spoke with Ron Paul earlier this year, and he said that the response to Boston last year was actually dangerous, that the erosion of civil liberties and the reliance on that kind of a government response is bad for the citizenry. Do you disagree with that?
When you looked at what a lot of people, I think, when they were responding to that, they were reacting to what happened in the manhunt afterwards. If you look at Harvey Silverglade, for example, who lives in Cambridge, is one of the more notable one of the more notable civil libertarians in this country, and he was very outraged about it, going as far as to compare what happened to East, activities in East Berlin. A lot of that was what the bulk of what I came across as the reaction was, the unhappiness. But that was in the aftermath. I was there throughout the entire shootout and that event, and it was very difficult to find people that were unhappy or were resistant to what occurred when the shelter-in-place order was put into effect and there was a lockdown and whatnot across the region. That had only occurred there was a precedent for that. The governor Deval Patrick in here, he ordered people off the roads during a major blizzard. I believe it was a year prior to that. So it wasn't on something of that type of a draconian type order, as a lot of people would refer to it as. That had had been, instituted before. The Boston Marathon, you brought up the issue of bag checks. They gave everybody one of these little yellow strips on every bag you came across at every little entranceway when I was going in. It was very different from in years past. It was, this event in Boston, I think a lot of people don't understand. It's a big party. There's a lot of people running around having a good time, and the marathon is sort of this event that it's just a big long party along the route. Everybody comes out and has a good time.
Yeah, there's an R in that word, right, Garrett?
A lot of the police and the public safety officials came out and they insisted that they wanted to maintain this event. And I think, based on my experiences when talking to the public today that attended, they seem to be happy with that.
All right. Well, Garrett, thank you very much, and thanks for your activities on the ground and your astute journalism. I do appreciate it, and thanks for being on The Independence.
Thanks for having me.
Amen. All right, well, let's assemble the party panel to talk about how happy people really were in Boston. We're going to sprinkle some hot sauce on the main dish. Fox News contributors Santita Jackson and Roy Murdoch join us. So would you have run that race, Santita, this year after?
Clearly not.
No, there's no clearly not. No. I do team in training, and I see people of all ages and all
sizes,
shapes.
right.
Absolutely.
You know what? I tell you, I'm excited that Boston has come back so strongly, but I always feel a little strange. I love the police. I don't want to feel policed. I happen to have been.
Do you think they were over-policed last year?
Well, maybe this year. I don't like to see I don't like to see tensions ratcheted up. I was in Los Angeles in '92, and I tell you, it was devastating to watch the tanks roll down Crenshaw Boulevard and Rodeo Drive, and to be confined to my hotel or wherever I was by the time dusk came. And I don't want to see America turn into that. And that is what, as we see these tensions ratcheted up. I have a cousin who lives up there, and he couldn't leave, and he's got a newborn. It was like, oh my gosh.
Okay, now, Camille, I see you nodding your head. Do you think that the people in Boston acquiesced to law enforcement too much in the aftermath and in the shootout?
Well, there's a tendency for a lot of Americans to do exactly that in the aftermath of something so tragic and chaotic. But it's interesting. I've often heard the phrase balancing safety and liberty, and I wonder if that's not the wrong way to approach something like this. I think it might be appropriate for us to just acknowledge the fact that there is a bit of a trade-off, that we are in fact exchanging perhaps some security that might be offered by a police state in which every movement and every action is policed in favor of liberty, because at the end of the day, there are important things that you actually risk when you have a police state, when you get used to that sort of government encroachment upon your individual liberty.
What do you think, Roy? Sorry.
Well, I think we need to remember that we're not talking about Boston being turned into a police state on a permanent basis, nor tanks running up and down Crenshaw Boulevard from 1992 onward. We're talking about an emergency situation. We had back right after the bombing that killed 3 people or four people and I think injured 246, something like that.
Yeah, 3 people killed at the race. The security guard was
yeah, and people losing their limbs. Just a horribly tragic situation. Now, you had a real clampdown afterwards when we had no idea. Were these just 2 brothers running around doing this, or they have 15 or 20 people ready to set more bombs off? If they were not shot, the older brother not shot and the younger one captured, who knows what more mayhem they may have continued. Yeah. So I think the point is there was a crackdown then, which I think was necessary. Eventually, people went back to their lives. There was a lot of security at the marathon yesterday. I imagine that security is a lot lighter tonight and probably be even lighter next weekend.
All right, well, let me ask you, Matt, how do you keep it in proportion? That's what I brought up at the top of the show. How do you sort of balance the unknowns? Because if you don't know if there's an active terror cell at work, how do you let that rational side guide you?
One way that you do it, and this sounds a bit like a dodge, but it's not really, is actually approach it constitutionally. See how much the police can get away with. I'm afraid that in Lower Manhattan, where Camille lives, not giving away his address yet, is that place is covered because of 9/11, and for understandable reasons, with cameras on every street corner. People live in a surveillance state in Lower Manhattan. I think that that's actually anti-constitutional, and that should guide you a little bit about where you draw your lines. Hopefully, Boston will go the way that the major party conventions have gone to. In 2004 in Boston, that was just a security nightmare. Everyone was tense. They thought everything was going to blow up. That has lessened over time, although it's still far too much barbed wire and armed guards.
Yes, and they took my hairspray going and coming into both the Democratic and Republican convention. That's why I'm an independent. independent. Let me tell you, 'cause
They took
those
mine,
parties
too.
are not going to tame my flyway.
You even need hairspray? I'm shocked.
Well,
But
Matt,
Kennedy,
that's a
they
great
really
compliment.
haven't rolled back. I mean, I'm speaking of 1992. That was 22 years ago. Now I've got cameras all over my neighborhood.
Yeah.
And it took me an hour to get through the airport this morning. So it's the new normal.
I am
And
so glad you brought that up
yeah.
because, Santita, we are having a special show on Friday called Up in Your Business, the TSA, just one of the areas that we are covering because the government, believe me, it is up there, and it is like visiting the lady doctor once a year.
Oh,
Except
my
it's 365
gosh.
days a year. All right, our panel is going to stand by, but we are going to let you, our lovely, luscious viewer, pick one of the panel topics tonight. What are they going to talk about? Go to our Facebook page right now, click like. If you want to hear more about the story of Chicago Public Schools introducing a new Afrocentric curriculum, or hit comment if you'd rather have the panel talk about the teen who apparently traveled from California to Hawaii in the plane's landing gear, which is a crazy story. You choose, though. The terrorists had a barbecue, and they forgot to invite you. But did they get smoked? First up, should prisoners be allowed to vote? Should nonviolent drug offenders be allowed to vote?
Yes,
Why?
because they're nonviolent, and depending on the type of drug, maybe it's not so bad. And I got to catch a train.
No, go get it. You look great. Fantastic. Hi, welcome back to The Independence. A little Weezer. It's so great. Well, pardon me if I go to prison for drugs, please. Eric Holder is getting all touchy-feely and loosey-goosey with convicted drug felons, and it looks like the Obama administration is finding a way to soften the edges of their participation in the never-ending war on drugs.
The White House has indicated it wants to consider additional clemency applications to restore a degree of justice, fairness, and proportionality for deserving individuals who do not pose a threat to public safety.
Oh, you wish you were Lando Calrissian. All right, well, how many nonviolent drug offenders will benefit from these new guidelines? And is it all talk? Or is there actual hope for people serving ridiculously long sentences for things like crack violations? Mike Riggs is the communications director for Families Against Mandatory Minimums. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Kennedy.
Well, Mike, tell me, are you encouraged by the Attorney General's new guidelines?
We are. I think there was maybe some reservations about whether or not it'll be as Yahoo reported this morning, which is hundreds or possibly thousands, or maybe just 8, which is what it was last time they commuted sentences.
Yeah, big difference between those two. Now, if I've been sitting in prison for 10, 15 years, maybe a couple decades for a crack conviction, what is the process I go through, and what are my chances, do you think?
Those are both complicated questions. Let's skip the process because I'm not a lawyer.
That's okay, Mike. That's okay, baby. Go play to your strengths, buddy.
I'm going to play to my strengths. So slightly under 100,000 nonviolent drug offenders in the federal prison system. At the very most, we're looking at thousands. Again, was the number that was tossed out today. I don't know if it's going to be that high. It's going to be people whose offenses were probably no guns involved. They maybe didn't have much of a criminal history. But what we're really looking at is people who, if they were sentenced today, would have gotten a lighter sentence than the one they got prior to the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, which reduced the disparity between crack cocaine and powder cocaine sentences. People who would have gotten a lighter sentence between the Booker Supreme Court decision, which basically made sentencing guidelines non-mandatory. And people who were sentenced prior to the start of Eric Holder's Smart on Crime initiative, in which he encouraged prosecutors to seek an appropriate sentence, not the harshest sentence that they could get.
All right, very good. Well, this wasn't the only glimmer of hope for nonviolent criminals. Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe, I just gagged when he apparently is going to reduce voting restrictions for the gentler felons. It's still a controversial topic for some people. So I hit the bricks and asked people if those convicted of greater crimes should still be allowed to cast votes. Should nonviolent drug offenders be allowed to vote?
No.
Yes, they should be allowed to vote.
Why?
Because they have to live here, too.
They're still drug offenders. They need to clear themselves first.
Okay, drugs are bad. Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
Everybody should have a chance to vote, no matter who you are.
Okay. Should nonviolent drug offenders be allowed to vote?
Of course. Absolutely.
Why?
Because they serve their time. That's it.
Voting is a privilege. It's a privilege. But I don't think that offense is strong enough to warrant not being able to vote.
And that man just got married and he's on his honeymoon in New York City. How cute is that? All right, well, Mike, you still there, buddy?
Absolutely.
Very good. Let me ask you, have Eric Holder and Terry McAuliffe influenced each other here? What's going on?
I don't know that they've influenced here. I think re-enfranchising felons, restoring their right to vote, you know, it's actually the norm. You know, I bet if you had asked people if they knew how many states disenfranchised their released felons, nobody would know. But the answer is very few because it's barbaric. If we're going to let people out of prison, we almost always do so with the expectation that they use their fresh start to, you know, be a better citizen, be a better taxpayer, a better community member. But if you take away their right to vote, you deny them good jobs, which we do with occupational licensing restrictions. We deny them access to student loans. We deny them access to firearms. We're essentially telling people, we want you to come out, we want you to play nice, we want you to be successful, but you can't defend yourself, you can't educate yourself, you can't work, and you can't throw out bad politicians. That's awful policy and it's awful politics.
Riggs, you're from Florida, where they have the highest number of former felons who are disenfranchised. I think there's more than 4 million, upwards about 5 million ex-felons who have served their time and cannot vote. Is there any actual action on the state level to fix this, since this is a state-based policy?
Shaming, finger wagging. You know, it's kind of funny. Governors go back and forth about it. One of the few good things that Governor Charlie Crist did on his way out the door was set the wheels in motion for re-enfranchising felons. Not all of them, but some of them. And Rick Scott, unfortunately, rolled those back, although this is not something that people think about a lot. It's almost always in states that have these felon disenfranchisement laws. It's sort of the motivation is purely momentum. This is the way things are. Why should we change it? So, and there's also some really. But if you dig, the justifications for felon disenfranchisement laws are pretty gross. There's this sort of really old, archaic, terrified Southerner meme here that. If you let felons vote, they'll vote in such a way that they will empower themselves to commit crimes without punishment, which is I don't know any voter who thinks that far ahead or is even that successful at the ballot
look at the non-felons. They voted Terry McAuliffe in office. Well,
yeah, exactly. What have they done for themselves lately?
Exactly.
You know? So,
hey, Mike Riggs, thanks so much. Please come back and bring your fam.
Yeah, thank you.
Families Against Mandatory Minimums. Very good. Our party panel is going to be back very shortly. But what should they yap about? You get to choose. You're the producer tonight on the show. Go to our Facebook page. Click like if you want to hear more about the Chicago Public Schools Afrocentric curriculum. Or hit comment if you want to hear about the teenage boy who stowed away in a plane's landing gear from California to Hawaii. Crazy. All right, coming up next, I hear those drones are coming. They're rolling around the bend. But if they're killing terrorists, are they justified? We will ask and answer next.
Let the smooth side show while you pull that load everywhere you go.
That is from the Sean Hannity collection, ladies and gentlemen. That is some freedom music right there. This is the Independence. Fun in the sun for some dudes who want to kill you, as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula is getting the band of blowhards back together. They released a new video where they look all tan and terroristy, and lo and behold, just days after the tape came to light, 55 militants in Yemen were blown into a fine mist. Is there a connection? And don't you secretly love a little drone striking retribution? WWRD. What would Rand do? We have to pause and ask ourselves that very question in light of these developments. Matt, what do you think?
As president, what would Rand do? He wouldn't do this. This is targeted assassination. These are kill lists, extrajudicial kill lists.
What if they're not Americans? What if they're
They're not Americans. Most of the
really
people aren't
want
Americans.
to kill us?
There's a decent chance that a large number of them are. The question is, what threshold are we willing to accept as Americans of when we can have the president press that little round button thing right there and then kill not just people who we know what their names are, but they have a signature. They're called signature strikes. We've seen them go in and out of this mosque, go in and out of this meeting, this terrorist camp. camp. It's a male between 16 and 25 or 30.
So you just go all the males who kind of look like that?
Right, and what we always see in the reporting on this is very careful, like in terms of just basic media consumption. They are always called suspected al-Qaeda militants on the first go-round.
Yeah.
It's only later that we hear, oh yeah, 10 of them were at a wedding, 3 of them were civilian day laborers, which is the case here. So we don't really have a way of knowing how efficacious this stuff is, and that's a problem. Do we want to go there as a country? I'm not that comfortable.
Although even if that acknowledgement comes, it generally does not come from the administration. The government is not ever going to talk about
Who
these
does that
things
come
publicly.
from? How does that work?
Well, we find out about it from any number of journalistic organizations on the ground. Occasionally, the governments will come out and release some of these numbers. But in the absence of a clearly stated and well-understood foreign policy, this is the policy pertaining to drone warfare. This is what we end up with, a situation where we have to be skeptical of all of these reports, and we have to wonder if this was a response to the bad press they got last week because of that well-publicized video that you mentioned earlier.
I got to think that it is. I mean,
but I mean, the president's saying we've got al-Qaeda on the run, and then you've got these guys saying, no, we're actually getting a bunch. They blurred some of the faces, so I'm assuming they couldn't get release forms signed. But, you know, the president's saying we got AQ on the run, but here they are. And it gets people kind of riled up. And believe you me, when people hear about drone strikes, they don't shed as many tears as they would if they were American citizens.
The vast majority of Americans don't really care if we're droning foreigners. They care if we're droning Americans, particularly on American soil.
Should there be a difference?
There is a difference. If you have constitutional rights as an American, you don't in terms of if you're a foreigner living abroad. But we should think about it more deeply than we do.
You're as cold as ice. All right, coming up, our panel is back and ready to talk about whatever you want to hear. Go to our Facebook page, press like if you want to hear more about the Chicago Public Schools Afrocentric curriculum. Press comment if you want to hear about the teen who apparently traveled from California to Hawaii in the plane's landing gear, which is crazy. Stay tuned for that. But first, get ready to snort some vodka. Not even lying about that. The topical storm is next. That always reminds me of Thor. Hopefully the Easter Bunny didn't leave you with goose eggs. You deserve the finest in Fabergé, and since I can't buy you that, how about some goofy news stories instead? Very good, this is the Topical Storm. Topic number 1, alcohol. It sounds like your friend who really likes booze, but really it's powdered alcohol. It has been approved by the government, and it finally does away with all that inconvenient liquid booze you've been slurping over the years. The makers used to basically taunt you to get drunk by sprinkling the powder over eggs and omelets and sneaking it into ball games and concerts where the price of booze is just too flippin' high. You could just sprinkle it in your water and boom! The Palcohol website, before it was scrubbed for the government's pleasure, promised you could get fully loaded a lot quicker if you snorted it. But here's the secret. Here it is, okay? Here it is. If you're too lazy or too dumb to drink your alcohol, you should probably stay sober and celibate. You don't need the government to tell you that.
No one's going to drink this or snort it. Why would you?
It's going to be gross and dumb.
Yeah.
Everyone's all worried. There's a lot of hysteria.
Sounds dangerous. Can't wait to try.
I know Camille's going to be the first person with a powdered alcohol party. He's going to be my Palcohol in need. Topic number 2. Look at that smile. Such a lovely boy. One of the most anxiety-provoking experiences in any senior boy's life is working up the nerve and stones to ask a girl to prom. The prom-asking ritual has grown very involved, and now every 18-year-old practically has to hire a skywriter or a string quartet to ask a maiden to the big dance. Not Patrick Favre. He had a purple rose, a school full of cheering comrades, and a captive audience as he strolled up to Miss America and asked for her hand in promness.
Miss America, excuse me, it's approved that we have
I love the woo girls, the authorities. They were trying to keep him down, but unfortunately Miss America's schedule prevented her from accepting, but not before the school stepped in to use its power to squash young Pat's confidence. He was suspended. At least Miss America thought it was nice.
You know, I did ask them to rethink their decision. I thought it was very sweet and very endearing.
And she's lovely, and she speaks in the girl accent, which I love. All right, on the upside, all the media attention has made him a superstar. Too bad he's too young to celebrate with a glistening line of alcohol right up the sniffer. Smells like freedom. All right, what do you think?
Everybody wins. He gets 3 days away from school. I don't see any problem here.
Helps to raise his street credibility. This is very good for him.
The
Win, win,
school
win.
clearly already loved him, and now he's a legend. All right, topic number 3. We all know dolphins are miraculous creatures who can use their sonar to sense our moods, our feelings, even our hormone levels. But who knew these sea-bound geniuses were also crime-sniffing weapons of mass destruction? Our government is deploying military dolphins and sea lions, no less, to use their clever beaks to suss out minds. 20 dolphins and 10 sea lions are going to the Black Sea to face off with Russian-trained communist aquatic life, because the fight for humanity starts and ends with our freedom flippers. Go get them, boys, and give it to those red bastards right in the blowhole. Who knew SeaWorld was the potential training ground for the greatest crime-fighting force in the ocean? Take that, Blackfish.
Smiling animals are not going to terrify the Russians into submission. Just so we are all clear on that fact.
Only 2 places on Earth can train dolphins to kill people and dolphins. It's in the United States, in San Diego, and in Russia. So we got the edge on you. All right, baby. All right, topic number 4, Connecticut Senator Earl Blumenthal. It's Earl, right?
It's Richard.
It's Richard? I know it says Richard, but Earl must be my LA City Councilman. He decided to hold a press conference on commuter safety and almost got hit by a speeding train.
Safety, as you know, is paramount.
Seriously.
You know, the conductor set up. I love it. Obviously, there's no IQ test to get into Congress, and he's lucky he escaped with life and limbs. But can you imagine the irony if, by his own ineptitude, he'd been swallowed whole by that train? A song by a lesser-known Canadian songstress called Alanis Morissette is ringing through my head. Oh, Richard, it's like 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. All right, Santita and DeRoy are going to come back to talk about a topic of your choosing. Go to our Facebook page right now. Follow the instructions, Afrocentric Chicago curriculum, or the boy who stowed away in the wheel well of a plane from California to Hawaii. You picked it. You got it. Stay with us. Forget you. That's fun. All right, well, this topic is getting a lot of attention on our Facebook page. Harry Reid single-handedly determining who earns the title domestic terrorist. With all your shady family comings and goings, you're on a slippery slope to be calling people names, Reid. Here's the senator talking about the Nevada rancher facing off with the feds.
These people who hold themselves out to be patriots are not. They're nothing more than domestic terrorists.
Careful there, Harry. Your hemorrhoids are showing. All right, so are those cattle ranchers really domestic terrorists? And don't we have more accurate, less hysterical descriptions of people we disagree with? Our panel is back, Santita and DeRoy. So what do you think about this?
I think that
Matt Welch.
Harry Reid has gone off the deep end over the last few months with his weird attacks on the Kochs, the Koch brothers he's mentioned 138 some odd times on the floor. Words actually have definitions here. He's the Senate Majority Leader. There's supposed to be some kind of, if we kill a few people, he's going to be in, or if they die of their own causes, he's going to be President of the United States. Have a little bit of decorum here. You don't call people terrorists just because they disagree, even just because they break the law. Terrorism is trying to kill people to send a message to scare the bejeebus out of everybody else. It is not telling the Bureau of Land Management to go take a walk when they steal their cattle.
No, it's very dangerous, isn't it, Camille?
Bureau of Land Management obviously overreached in this particular circumstance. And Senator Reid also pointed out to the fact that this gentleman is not paying his taxes or something else. Those particular agencies have appropriate recourse if, in fact, that is the problem. Wacko libertarian that I am, residing somewhere between Rothbardistan and Nozickville, I don't begrudge this gentleman doing all sorts of wacky stuff. But again, the government should take appropriate steps here, not the Bureau of Land Management confiscating his cattle.
Yeah, and shouldn't Harry be careful? Doesn't he have like tens of thousands of dollars in campaign money to spend on his granddaughter's jewelry?
You know what? I will say this. I am always suspicious of calling American sisters and brothers or anyone others. And that is where I love Senator Reid, but this is a little bit of overreach. Terrorism is very, very loaded, particularly at this time, but it's loaded always. And I think we need to stop talking about people and talk to them. I'd like to see Mr. Bundy on television. I'd like to hear him explain himself. And I'd like to hear the feds talk about why they'd rather switch than fight.
Yeah.
Because that was a big deal for them to back all the way down. So, I mean, let's talk about this. Let's talk this through. Let's find out about these 300 cattle who were seized and why so many people from all over the country decided to get involved in this issue.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
I mean, but isn't this a contract that ranchers have with the state of Nevada? That they know that their cattle can graze and munch on the grasses that Mother Earth provides for us in this state and many others?
Yeah, that's the way it works out west. And if Mr. Bundy is not paid his grazing fees, the way to handle it, I think, is to put a lien on his property or say, look, you're not going to get your tax refund back until you pay us the money you owe us or something like that. You don't have to send these armed federal agents in. You don't have to send somebody to go tase one of his relatives, which apparently is what happened. These aren't domestic terrorists who are protesting against this. Domestic terrorists, the kind of people who blew up people at the Boston Marathon a year ago, yesterday. Those are what domestic terrorists are. I think there's another question here, which is why does the federal government own 85% of Nevada? Wouldn't it be possible for Mr. Bundy just to buy this land and then graze as much as he wants, pay some money and purchase it outright? I don't know why the federal government owns all this property. They go buy more property, and they very much mismanage a lot of the property that they already own.
It was the sweetener to get the western states into the union. They said, okay, you can do that, but the federal government has to own a whole bunch of land.
But
that was a long time ago.
Okay, but if it's your land and their land, doesn't that make it our land? Not to get all holy on everybody, but come on, man. Well, earlier we asked you to pick our next panel topic, and here were your choices. A new Afrocentric curriculum in Chicago public schools, or the teenage boy who apparently traveled from California to Hawaii and the plane's landing gear. 80% of you, an overwhelming majority, voted for the Afrocentric curriculum topic. Just 20%, if you're doing the math at home, you voted for the crazy teen. I would have voted for the teen, but you know what? That's just me. That's just me reading the stories and making up my mind. But let's get to it. That's what you want. And this is what we've got. The Black Athena by Martin Bernal and They Came Before Columbus by Van Sertima. Two questionable, not really literary works that are being introduced to 5th and 8th graders in Chicago public schools.
Well, you know, I think it's much more than that. I think this is not Afrocentric. I think we're talking about introducing blacks who are in history. And we have to have a more expansive view of what we teach our children.
Okay,
our children need to know all the people
Santina,
who
I agree with you
contributed to
completely,
the
and
United
I think it's
States.
very important to have wonderful perspective and to learn about great African Americans in history. We don't need to make them up by writing about things like the Black Athena. I mean, you don't have to say that the Greeks stole everything from the Egyptians,
Kennedy,
who may or may not have been very dark-skinned.
But Kennedy, when you go to that part of the world, this is a conversation that they have, and this is their perspective. This is not coming out of thin air. This is accepted scholarly work around the world, and we at least need to talk about it.
All right,
come on now.
As far as
when you go to Egypt, they talk about their books having been stolen and taken to Rome and taken to Greece. That's what they say when you're in Egypt. That's what they talk about.
I mean, but the difference between the Roman Empire borrowing from the Greeks and renaming their gods, that's very different. I mean, there were times when Jews intermingled with Zoroastrians and, you know, learned about an evil, vindictive god. That doesn't mean they're stealing. I mean, influence is not stealing, and you can't claim
but you
credit.
have influence, but they did take their library.
But we can. The real problem here, I think, is whether we teach an Afrocentric curriculum or about Zoroastrian or Zoroastrians or whatever it is. Only 21% of Chicago school students, 8th graders, are reading at grade level. Only 19% of them are proficient in math. That needs to be the focus. How do we get these kids basically to be able to learn at grade level? And then you can debate whatever it is you want to teach them. These kids are not even able to do the basics, so they can learn basics without getting into African history or anything else. I'm sure they barely know their American history as it is.
Well, that's certainly part of it. But I think what this dispute brings to light is what public education actually does. It causes us to fight and squabble over any number of relatively irrelevant, smallish details. Educating children ought to be the first priority. Parents ought to be making determinations about where they want to send their kids, and they should vote with their feet and with their wallets about the sort of curriculum they're interested in.
But when you are
they should be able to do it in every single instance.
Because you don't have any choices, because people are shutting down charter schools.
They should be able to do it in every
instance. Private schools are way too expensive, and the idea of school choice is now somehow pornographic and offensive.
But you know, but I am a product of the Chicago public school system, a proud product of it. Look, I want children who don't learn, just do rote learning. I want them to be able to think. So introduced Yvonne von Sertima's books, Martin Bernal's books. Introduce them all. Have them read Benjamin Franklin's books. Have them read them all. Most Americans don't read books anymore. And let's have some debates, let's have some discussions, but also introduce perspectives that are not our own. That's what the Founding Fathers did, and that's what broad people everywhere need to do.
Yeah, but when you have something that's getting that much literary backlash, maybe you should look at it and go, no,
well, who's doing the backlash?
Oh, well, let me just read to you right here. Glenn Daniel.
But you know,
from the 1977 New York Times.
Let's talk to Dr. Hakeem Madhubuti.
Ignorant rubbish.
Well, no, let's talk to Dr. Hakeem Madhubuti. Let's talk to Dr. Alvin Poussin.
I love anyone with booty in the name, believe me.
Well, no. Let's read up Dr.
Let's
W.E.B. Du Bois, but Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, you have Dr. John Henrik Clark. You have a whole body of scholars.
What about County Cullen? We could go
on.
on.
No, not County Cullen. He was a poet.
We still have, unfortunately, Chicago schools.
No. I'm talking about historians and educators.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Chicago schools have a 31% dropout rate among black students, 37%. So yes, I agree with you. It's good to get a variety of perspectives, but let's not forget we have a crisis there among kids who can't do the basics respected.
No, it's not good, and it's and maybe
not just Chicago. This is something so many school districts.
And I hate to say, but we have to drop out of that too. Panel, thank you very much. We'll see you in the after show. And sweet for you for going to our Facebook page and working it up. Love it. All right, Camille is going to talk about a controversy he stepped into last week when he asked Ron Paul about a 9/11 conspiracy theory published on his website. But first, is it possible that sweatshops are good? That's coming up next. Stay with us. When I was younger. All right, welcome back to The Independents. We're not getting any younger here, so we got to get to it, people. We like to challenge conventional wisdom every once in a while and take our viewers to new places intellectually, because we can't load up a van and take it to Saskatchewan. That would take too long. So here's a question for you. Is it possible that sweatshops are actually good? Yes, horrible, awful sweatshops. The word itself, sweatshop, it evokes terrible images of poor people and children suffering in third world countries, slaving away in awful conditions to make products for us selfish Americans. Thank you. What? But is that idea all wrong? Joining us is Benjamin Powell. He's the author of Out of Poverty, Sweatshops in the Global Economy. Benjamin, welcome.
Hey, Kennedy, good to be back and see you again.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here. I know we have a bit of a delay, so we'll work around it. It is live television, and I will ask you, define sweatshops.
Yeah, I think we have to be very clear what we're talking about from the outset. So we're talking about places with very poor working conditions, as us normal Americans would experience it, very low wages by our standard, maybe children working places that might not obey local labor laws. But there's a key characteristics of the type of ones I want to talk to you about tonight, Kennedy, and that's that they're places where people choose to work, admittedly from a bad set of other options. But the fact that they choose them has important consequences, I think, both morally and in our positive analysis of the role that these things play. This is separate from slave labor. If we're literally using the threat of coercion to make somebody work there, that is slave labor. Boycotting the products are the appropriate solution to it, but not for this other type of sweatshop that just have these bad conditions and low wages.
All right, you say it's not coercive, but what if someone has no other choice? What if this is the only decent wage they could make when they're sitting, I mean, literally slaving over a sewing machine, using their fine motor skills for hours and hours at a time? Obviously, it's not ideal, but it's also not that great. I mean, you kind of romanticize it.
Now, I'm not romanticizing anything here, Kennedy. Listen, working in a sweatshop stinks, and it's much worse than that. But recognizing that it's the best available option to them now has important implications, because the last thing we should want to do as people in the first world who care about these people is take away their least bad option and then throw them into the even worse alternatives, which is often subsistence agriculture, informal service sector work, places that pay much less, where poverty is much more pervasive. These sweatshop jobs, as undesirable as they are the first rung on the ladder out of extreme poverty, both in our own history and in the countries around the world today.
All right, well, you know what? It's a really interesting argument. Benjamin, thank you very much for being here, because obviously if we are going to allow third world countries to evolve and progress and become first world countries, we need for them to use the resources which they have. Sometimes all that is a labor force. Thank you very much, Benjamin. All right, coming up next, Camille Foster sparked a minor controversy last week when he asked Ron Paul about a 9/11 conspiracy article that appeared on Ron Paul's website. Camille has more to say on the topic. You're not going to want to miss it. Maybe it'll make you mad. Stay with us.
The combination made my eyes bleed. No question, I will flow off and try to get the dough off. Sticking up right boys on board.
Look at that happy bobblehead. Welcome back to the Independence. Last week, Ron Paul appeared on this very program, as he often does. Camille Foster made some news when he asked Dr. Paul about a controversial article that appeared on ronpaulinstitute.org that supported 9/11 conspiracy theories. All right, here is part of Dr. Paul's response.
Well, it's just that people should have a right to express their viewpoints. If you read 99% of the article, it was a fantastic article. So I think that's a little bit overkill with political correctness.
I like you, Dr. Paul, but I think you got your math wrong there. All right, well, since that aired, Camille has gotten quite a bit of attention. Camille, what's going on?
Well, it's unfortunate. You know, it may be a little bit incongruent, but I am a guy who's had a little bit of problems with both politicians and politics. In a word or a few, I dislike both of them and don't have much patience for them. There's generally been one exception to that rule, and that's Mr. Ron Paul. I'm a guy who supported his campaign financially in the past. Back in the 2008 election, I actually went up to New Hampshire and campaigned for the guy.
That's part of your becoming a libertarian.
This is part of my becoming a libertarian story. I was very enthusiastic about him. There were any number of folks who thought that I was unfair to even have asked the question. I'm not sure that any reasonable person watching that could have taken that away. But the reason I asked is because I think there's a very dangerous and poisonous strain of trutherism within the libertarian movement, within the liberty movement broadly. And I was giving Dr. Paul an opportunity to distance himself from that because, quite frankly, I think it is absolutely imperative that we are clear that there is no room for the Alex Jones charlatans of the world, and perhaps even the folks who well-intentioned and perhaps honestly believe that there is some sort of dubious conspiracy being perpetrated by the federal government. There's no evidence of that. It's ridiculous, and we need to draw a line in the sand. And I think it's appropriate for Dr. Paul to do exactly the same thing and to be careful that he's not empowering these same malevolent forces.
Ron Paul is not a distancer. That's not what he does. He's had plenty of opportunities in the past. He's had problems with newsletters that appeared under his own name. And when asked about it, he will just say, hey, look, free speech. I'm not going to give back that donation. I'm not going to distance myself from people if those people are really, really good on the issues that I care about, which for him are almost always war, civil liberties, Federal Reserve. That's basically it. And so that's what happened in this case.
And I take him at his word. I believe he doesn't believe these conspiracy theories. I just wish he'd be clearer about it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's a disservice to the victims and their families. And you know what? Just drop the truther aspect, you tards. All right, well, coming up tonight, we have the after show. Thank you so much for watching. At midnight, we will air this show again. Go to our webpage now for After Hours, foxbusiness.com/The Independence. From Matt, I'm Kennedy. Good night.